On a quiet summer night in Douglasville, Georgia, just hours before her 57th birthday, a woman's laughter vanished into the dark. A home once filled with family warmth would, before dawn, become a scene officers would never forget. It was supposed to be a weekend of joy, a small gathering, some music, a promise of peace. But as the clock struck 11:42 p.m., something shifted. And before anyone could understand what was happening, it was already too late. How does love turn into fear when the person you trust most becomes the threat?
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
Atlanta, Georgia. A city that hums with ambition, rhythm, and Southern pride. In its heart, beneath the golden lights and tireless movement, lived a woman whose laughter could fill a room, Sabrina Walker. Born and raised in Atlanta's West Side, she was the daughter of working-class parents who believed in faith, hard work, and the kind of kindness that leaves fingerprints on everyone it touches. Sabrina learned early that life didn't hand you anything easy, you had to earn it, cut by cut, day by day. Her story wasn't made of fame or fortune, but of grit, the kind that comes from juggling bills, raising children, and still finding time to smile. She had an energy people gravitated to, warm, bold, and real. In a world where many wore masks, Sabrina showed her scars. And somehow, that made people love her more. In 2009, after years of cutting hair in other people's shops, she made a move that scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. She opened her own, Groomsmen Atlanta. It wasn't much at first, cracked mirrors, mismatched chairs, and a flickering neon sign that buzzed louder than her first clippers. But it was hers. And for Sabrina, that was everything. Over the years, that tiny barbershop became a heartbeat of its own. Not just a place for fades and shaves, but for stories, advice, and laughter. A neighborhood refuge. She wasn't just my barber. She was family. You'd walk in for a haircut and leave with a pep talk, a prayer, and a smile. Sabrina gave back, even when she didn't have much. That's just who she was. You could feel it the moment you sat in her chair. Her chair, that's where the magic lived. The place where she mended confidence, restored spirits, and sometimes, even brokered peace between broken people. For Sabrina, every customer was a canvas, every haircut a small act of care. And she believed that when people looked good, they felt seen again. Behind that chair, she built a life not just for herself, but for her daughters, Anesha Nixon, 29, and Michaela Barneswell, 26. Two women who were more than her pride, they were her reason. They called her the sun in their sky, a force of nature who never sat still, never complained, and always found a way. To them, she wasn't just a mother. She was proof that dreams, no matter how small, were worth fighting for. And by 2024, life seemed to finally be smiling back. After years of saving, planning, and late nights at the shop, Sabrina had done it again. She had renovated Groomsmen Atlanta, her baby, from floor to ceiling. New blue walls, bright lights, mirrors so clean they caught every angle of hope she carried. A complete rebirth. The grand reopening was set for Sunday, her birthday. Her daughters said she'd been buzzing with excitement all week, staying up late to check details, sending pictures to friends, even talking about new hires. She'd call it, my new beginning. And everyone who knew her believed she deserved it. She was so happy. You could see it in her eyes. Mama was about to celebrate everything she'd worked for. Michaela. She kept saying, this time, everything's gonna be different. We didn't know how much those words would haunt us. But at home, something else had been growing, something quiet and dark. Her marriage to Valanta LaJuan Walker, 51, had been strained for years. Friends described the tension as hidden behind closed doors, the kind of unrest no one sees until it's too late. There were whispers of arguments, of pressure, of love turned sour. But Sabrina, ever the optimist, believed in fixing things. She always did. Friday night came like any other, warm Georgia air, the hum of streetlights, laughter from neighbors' porches. Inside the Walkers' home on Littlebrook Way, the walls carried a different sound, raised voices, heavy words, the echo of years unraveling. Neighbors would later say they heard a woman's voice, pleading. Then, footsteps. Then silence. Sabrina ran out of the house, maybe to escape, maybe to survive, but he followed. Valanta, armed, angry, unrecognizable. And in the quiet of that suburban night, the unthinkable happened. When officers arrived around 9:30 p.m., they found Sabrina lying outside. Unmoving. Her husband stood nearby, gun in hand. They ordered him to drop it. He didn't. Instead, he pointed it at them, and in a split-second decision, an officer pulled the trigger. Valanta was struck and rushed to the hospital. Sabrina was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 1 day away from turning 57. 1 day away from cutting the ribbon to her dream. 1 day away from seeing the future she had fought her whole life to build. Her daughters would later open the shop anyway, not because they weren't grieving, but because they knew she would have wanted it that way. Michaela, my mama put her blood, sweat, and tears into this business. We had to finish what she started. That's how she lives on. For Sabrina, the barbershop wasn't just a business. It was her victory, a symbol of every struggle she had survived. But in her home that Friday night, something was unraveling. Something she didn't see coming. Saturday, July 8, 2023. The sun rose soft and golden over Douglasville, Georgia. It was one of those mornings that carried the weight of good things waiting to happen, the kind of day Sabrina Walker had been dreaming about for months. Inside Groomsman Atlanta, music played from her phone, upbeat and full of promise. She was laughing with clients, sweeping up the floor between haircuts, giving directions about balloons and banners for the grand reopening. Her smile seemed endless. This was her moment. Her daughters said she'd been up since dawn, texting them pictures of the shop's final touches. The new blue walls shimmered under the morning light, mirrors lined perfectly, chairs polished, the scent of fresh paint still in the air. Every detail mattered to her, every brush stroke, every small improvement. To her, the shop wasn't just work, it was her heartbeat. She wanted everything perfect before the doors opened to the public the next day, her birthday. By mid-morning, regulars dropped by just to see her. Some brought small gifts, others words of encouragement. "Sabrina, you did it again," one man told her, shaking his head with pride. She laughed, that bright, contagious laugh, and brushed off the compliment like she always did. For her, success was never about showing off. It was about showing up. Around noon, the door opened, and the air in the shop shifted. Valanta LaJuan Walker stepped inside. Witnesses say Sabrina's smile faltered for just a moment. He wasn't expected. The customers remember the look on her face, polite, but uneasy. One described the way he spoke to her, a little sharp, like something underneath his words wasn't right. He stayed only a few minutes, saying something about wanting to talk later, before walking out again. No one in that room could have known how important that brief visit would become. At the time, it was just another uneasy moment between a couple who, to most people, looked steady enough from the outside. But for Sabrina, that edge in his tone stayed with her the rest of the day. After he left, she tried to shake it off. She sent a message to her daughter, Anesha, with a picture of the shop. "Everything's coming together, baby. Tomorrow's gonna be beautiful." Anesha replied with hearts and excitement. "We're so proud of you, Mama. You did it." For the next few hours, life returned to normal, or what passed for it. The hum of the clippers, the rhythm of laughter, and the soft buzz of dreams coming true. Sabrina looked alive, free. Her staff said she was dancing between chairs, humming along to an old Mary J. Blige song, joking about finally getting some rest after Sunday's ribbon cutting. But beneath that joy, something fragile was trembling. Friends later said she'd mentioned the arguments at home, how things had been tense. She told one friend she hoped the reopening might bring some peace. She wanted to believe that success could heal what was broken. That maybe once her husband saw what she'd built, he'd feel proud too. As afternoon turned into evening, Sabrina locked up the shop. The golden light hit the blue walls one last time before she turned off the lights. Outside, she stood for a moment, staring at the sign, Groomsman Atlanta. Her life's work. She smiled to herself. Tomorrow was the day. That evening, neighbors on Littlebrook Way noticed the familiar sound of her voice, strong, clear, carrying through the summer air. But this time, it wasn't laughter. It was an argument. Witnesses recall seeing Sabrina standing outside the house, her hands gesturing sharply. She told Valanta to let it go. Her tone wasn't angry, more tired than anything. Like someone trying to calm a storm already forming in the distance. A neighbor across the street, watering his lawn, said he saw Valanta pacing. His movements were restless, agitated. You could feel it, the man would later tell investigators. Like something heavy was sitting in the air. Inside their home, the tension rose and fell like a wave. There had been arguments before, but this one felt final, a breaking point. She'd spent the day celebrating her accomplishments, but now, the joy seemed to drain from her face. Still, Sabrina tried to hold the peace. She'd always been the peacemaker, the bridge between anger and calm. But even bridges can crack under too much weight. By nightfall, the neighborhood had gone quiet. Porch lights glowed softly, the sound of cicadas filled the air. Behind the closed doors of the Walker home, words were being exchanged that no one could hear, words that would never be taken back. Her daughters, unaware of what was happening, were still texting her, finalizing the plans for the next day. Balloons, food, the ribbon, who would speak first? She didn't respond right away. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was trying to cool the heat in the room. Later, one neighbor said she thought she heard Sabrina's voice again, faint and strained. Another mentioned the sound of a door closing hard. It's hard to know what happened in those final hours before tragedy, what words were spoken, what emotions broke loose. But one thing is certain, everything changed that night. She had no idea those would be some of her last words spoken outside that home. By nightfall, the laughter from the shop had turned into something else entirely. Silence. It was just past 9 on Saturday night, July 8, 2023. The heat still clung to the air outside the Walker home on Littlebrook Way, but inside, something colder was spreading. What began as another argument between husband and wife had turned into something darker, something that would end in tragedy before the hour was over. Investigators later reconstructed those final moments. Around 9 p.m., voices grew louder behind the closed doors. Neighbors described hearing shouting, angry, sharp words echoing through the quiet neighborhood. A phone was thrown. It hit the wall, shattering. Something heavy fell. Sabrina tried to calm the storm, her voice breaking through the noise, pleading for space, for peace, for him to listen. But he didn't. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no struggle from an outsider. This wasn't the work of an intruder. It was the collapse of something that had been cracking for years, the kind of destruction that happens not from the outside in, but from the inside out. According to the investigation, Sabrina grabbed her phone and tried to call one of her daughters. The message never went through. Moments later, she ran for the door. Maybe she thought if she could just get outside, if she could just make it into the open, someone would hear her. Someone would help. She made it as far as the driveway. A neighbor, an older man who lived across the street, would later tell police, "We heard her scream, then silence, then shots." 3 gunshots broke through the night, sharp, final, echoing across the neighborhood like a shattering of everything she had built. For a few seconds afterward, there was nothing but the hum of night insects and the sound of someone's dog barking in the distance. Then, the silence returned. At 9:28 p.m., Douglasville Police Dispatch received a 911 call. Shots fired on Littlebrook Way. Within minutes, patrol cars raced through the quiet streets, their red and blue lights painting the houses in flashes of panic. When they arrived, officers found Sabrina lying near the front of the home, unresponsive. Her husband stood nearby, gun still in hand. Officers shouted for him to drop it. Instead, he raised it toward them. A single officer fired. The bullet struck Valanta Walker. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital. He was still alive. Sabrina was not. Inside the house, investigators found the remnants of her evening, a kitchen counter lined with half-inflated birthday balloons, scissors beside the tape she'd been using to hang them, a box of pastries she planned to serve at the reopening the next morning. The same hands that had decorated her dream hours earlier now lay still on the pavement outside. Neighbors stood on their porches in disbelief as flashing lights filled the street. Some were crying. Others stood frozen. A few whispered prayers. None could understand how a day so full of hope had turned into a scene so tragic. The detectives moved carefully through the home, documenting everything: the shattered phone, the overturned chair, the faint smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. They knew right away this wasn't random. It was personal. It was rage. It was heartbreak that had lost control. What unfolded in those minutes would change two families, and an entire community, forever. A mother gone. A husband in critical condition. Two daughters staring at a world suddenly without the woman who had held it together for them all.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
In the days to come, people would talk about how happy she'd been that morning, how proud she looked in front of her shop, how her laughter had filled the air. And they would wonder, the same way we all do when tragedy feels too close, could anyone have stopped what was about to happen? The Douglasville Police Department was the first to arrive at Littlebrook Way, responding to the 9:28 p.m. call reporting multiple gunshots. Bodycam footage later released to investigators captures the tension in raw detail, the flashing lights painting the quiet suburban street in red and blue as officers took defensive positions. Their voices cut sharply through the night: "Drop the weapon. Drop it now." The commands echoed against the nearby houses, their urgency matched only by the chaos unfolding before them. As the cameras rolled, the scene came into focus: Valanta Walker, standing over Sabrina's lifeless body, still clutching the gun. His white t-shirt was stained, his breathing shallow, his hands trembling. Officers shouted again, giving him every chance to surrender. But Valanta didn't drop the weapon. Instead, in a brief, chilling moment, he lifted the gun slightly, not enough to fire, but enough to make the officers react. The report of a single police round broke the tension. Valanta fell instantly, the gun clattering onto the pavement beside him. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, pierced only by the faint static from the radios and the sound of one officer whispering, "Shots fired, suspect down." Within minutes, the flashing lights multiplied as backup units and EMTs flooded the street, their boots splashing through shallow puddles and broken glass. Emergency responders moved quickly. One team checked Sabrina first, but their faces told the story before any words did. She was gone. Multiple gunshot wounds, no pulse. Paramedics covered her body with a sheet as neighbors began to gather quietly behind the yellow tape, their faces pale with disbelief. They had seen Sabrina just that afternoon, laughing, holding birthday decorations, planning to celebrate the next day. Now, that same celebration lay shattered, the balloons still visible through the window, swaying slightly from the night breeze coming through the open door. Officers turned their focus to Valanta. He was alive, barely conscious, bleeding from a single gunshot wound to the shoulder. As they secured him on a stretcher, one detective's bodycam caught a haunting detail: his eyes fixed on Sabrina's covered body, expression frozen between shock and regret. It was a look that would replay in courtrooms and news broadcasts for months to come. Within hours, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, was called in, standard protocol for officer-involved shootings. They sealed off the house and began processing the scene. Every bullet casing, every shattered picture frame, every bloodstain was catalogued. Investigators reconstructed the events minute by minute, determined to understand what had pushed a father, husband, and respected member of the community to such a devastating act. Detectives soon realized that what happened outside was only half the story. Inside the house, the evidence painted a disturbing picture of what had taken place before the police arrived: overturned furniture, a smashed phone on the floor, and fresh marks on the kitchen wall suggesting a violent struggle. On the counter, amid the chaos, sat Sabrina's purse and a half-deflated balloon that read, "Happy Birthday, Beautiful." The contrast was chilling, the remnants of love and celebration beside the aftermath of death. As dawn approached, the neighborhood remained blocked off. Reporters began to arrive, and whispers spread quickly: was it murder? Was it an accident? But those who had heard the screams earlier that night already knew the answer. What unfolded on Littlebrook Way was not sudden madness, it was a tragedy years in the making, waiting for the moment to explode. The chaos lasted less than 5 minutes. But its echo would haunt the neighborhood for years. Behind those flashing lights and police barriers lay a story far deeper than anyone imagined, a story of love turned violent, by midnight, the house on Littlebrook Way had transformed from a family home into a crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across the walkway. Detectives moved carefully through each room, documenting everything they saw. Every inch of the living room told a story, one not of strangers breaking in, but of something far more personal and heartbreaking. The furniture was overturned, as if a struggle had broken out suddenly. Family pictures lay scattered across the floor, their glass frames shattered. One frame still held a smiling family portrait, Valanta, Sabrina, and their 2 daughters at a church event 2 summers earlier. The smiles, once full of life, now seemed hauntingly still. In the kitchen, investigators found more signs of chaos. A coffee mug lay broken near the sink, and streaks of blood trailed faintly toward the back door. On the counter, something stood out, a birthday card addressed to Mom, written in neat handwriting with small hearts drawn in pink marker. It was from her daughters. The envelope was still sealed, never opened. Nearby, detectives noted a small stack of deflated balloons and ribbons that Sabrina had been preparing earlier that day. The words, "Happy Birthday," were barely visible through the smudged ink and blood spatters. That small detail, an unopened birthday card beside a crime scene, would become one of the most haunting images in the case file. On the living room floor, investigators found a weapon, a black 9mm handgun registered in Valanta's name. The magazine was almost full, but one bullet was missing, its casing found near the entryway. Gunpowder residue tests later confirmed Valanta had fired the weapon. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, and no footprints from anyone other than the couple. It was clear, no intruder had come through that door. Whatever had happened, it began, and ended, within the walls of their own home. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation began piecing together the sequence. Forensics suggested the argument started in the kitchen, where fragments of the broken phone were found. The phone appeared to have been thrown against the wall, possibly in anger. From there, the fight moved toward the living room, where a chair was overturned, and a trail of blood droplets led toward the doorway. It matched the timeline reconstructed from neighbors' statements: shouting, a scream, then silence, followed by the sound of 3 gunshots. Detective Sheila Monroe later described the atmosphere that night as heavy, like grief itself had settled over the house. She and her team found small things that spoke volumes: a Bible left open on the coffee table, its pages marked at Psalms 46 verse 1, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." There was no sign of a planned getaway, no evidence of an outsider, and no struggle suggesting someone else had entered. Everything pointed to a domestic explosion of emotion, the kind that builds quietly for years until one night it can't be contained anymore. As investigators dug deeper, friends began to share details that added painful clarity. In the weeks before her death, Sabrina had confided in two close friends from church. Through text messages later recovered by police, she mentioned her fear of Valanta's temper. One message read, "He gets angry over small things now. I don't know who he is anymore." Another said, "I'm just trying to keep the peace for the girls." Those texts painted a portrait of a woman trying to hold her home together, even when she no longer felt safe within it. According to one friend, Sabrina had been planning to leave. She had quietly reached out to a real estate agent to inquire about a small apartment nearby. Investigators found an unsigned rental form in her email drafts. She hadn't told Valanta, at least, not directly. But some argue he may have sensed it. Those final days before her death had been unusually tense, according to relatives who spoke with her the week prior. Her voice on the phone sounded tired, distant, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from work, but from trying too long to fix what's already broken. The couple's daughters, who were away with relatives that weekend, later told authorities that arguments between their parents had become more frequent. They recalled nights when they'd heard yelling through their bedroom doors, and mornings when their mother's eyes were red, pretending she was just tired. One of the girls mentioned that her mom had told her, "No matter what happens, I love you and your sister." That line, in hindsight, felt like a silent goodbye. Inside the master bedroom, detectives discovered more fragments of a long, painful story. A dresser drawer was half open, clothes scattered as if someone had been packing in a hurry. There were two suitcases on the floor, one open, one zipped. Sabrina's handbag, placed near the door, still held her wallet, car keys, and a neatly folded note addressed simply, "For the girls." Though the note was blood-stained and torn, parts of it were legible. She had written about wanting them to stay strong and remember kindness even when life feels cruel. Investigators believe she may have written it earlier that day, intending to leave it behind if she left that night. Every discovery inside the Walker home painted a picture not just of violence, but of despair, of a woman trapped between love and fear, duty and survival. She had stayed for the children, for the home, for appearances. But the walls that once sheltered her had turned into the cage where her final moments unfolded. The investigators' report was clinical, but behind every line of text lay human pain. The scene exhibits signs of struggle, it read. The victim sustained multiple gunshot wounds at close range. Weapon recovered at the scene. No indication of third-party involvement. But beyond those words were the silent echoes of years spent enduring, hoping, and forgiving, until there was nothing left to forgive. Later, forensic psychologist Dr. Irene Blake, who reviewed the case, would explain that such tragedies rarely happen overnight. What we see here, she said, is the endpoint of emotional corrosion. The slow decay of communication, trust, and self-worth. When control replaces love, and fear replaces peace, it's only a matter of time before something breaks. Outside, as investigators continued their work, neighbors gathered under umbrellas, still trying to make sense of what had happened. Some wept quietly, others just stood in disbelief. They had known the Walkers as a loving family. Valanta had helped fix neighbors' fences, and Sabrina often baked cookies for local children. To them, this was unimaginable. But as one neighbor put it softly, you never really know what happens behind closed doors. By the time dawn broke, the evidence had been catalogued and removed. The house, once filled with laughter and family photos, now stood cold and hollow. Reporters began to swarm the area, their cameras flashing through the foggy morning air. Yet, inside those walls, the truth remained painfully simple: this was not a crime of passion by a stranger. It was a domestic tragedy, raw, intimate, and final. In the following days, news headlines captured the public's attention. Phrases like, "Douglasville domestic tragedy," and "birthday celebration ends in bloodshed" appeared across local stations. Social media was flooded with tributes for Sabrina, friends sharing photos of her smile, her kindness, and the words she used to encourage others. But underneath the condolences, there was an unspoken question: how did no one see this coming? She had tried to keep the peace, even when the home no longer felt safe. The signs were there, the fear in her messages, the arguments, the exhaustion in her eyes. But like so many others, she hoped love would be enough to fix what was falling apart. How many warnings do we ignore before it's too late? How many times do we look away from what's uncomfortable, hoping it will somehow get better? The camera pans across the now empty living room, resting on the unopened birthday card on the counter. Its presence lingers as a silent symbol of everything that could have been: love, forgiveness, a new beginning, now forever interrupted. The scene cuts to black, leaving only the question echoing in the viewer's mind. In the quiet after violence, what remains are the moments we missed, the signs we didn't see, the words we never said. The sun rose over Douglasville with a heaviness that words could barely capture. By morning, news vans and local reporters had gathered outside Groomsman Atlanta, the barbershop that was supposed to open its doors for a grand reopening that very day. The same shop Sabrina had poured her heart, laughter, and savings into now stood silent behind locked glass doors. Blue ribbons still hung across the entryway, fluttering weakly in the summer wind. Balloons tied to the porch railing sagged under the weight of dew. The sign that read, "Grand Reopening, July 9th, looked painfully out of place, a reminder of a celebration that would never come. Around 8 a.m., 2 cars pulled up slowly to the curb. Inside were Anesha and Michaela, Sabrina's daughters. They had flown in as soon as they heard the news, praying it was all a mistake. But as they stepped out and saw the yellow police tape around their childhood home, the truth hit them like a storm. Michaela fell to her knees, screaming her mother's name, while Anesha stood frozen, her face drained of color. She was supposed to be cutting ribbons, Anesha whispered through tears, not lying cold in a morgue. The world they knew, the mother who had built their future with clippers and courage, was gone. Family members began arriving in waves. Cousins, uncles, old friends from church. Some hugged in silence, others couldn't stop crying. News crews captured their pain, microphones hovering, but the family's grief was too raw for words. Inside the barbershop, the chairs Sabrina had polished the night before still gleamed under the morning light. Her apron hung neatly on the hook, her name embroidered in white letters, Ms. Sabrina, owner and master barber. Every detail in that shop, every brush, every mirror, every framed photo, told a story of a woman who refused to give up, who had built something beautiful out of struggle. Later that afternoon, the family gathered to make an impossible decision: should they cancel the reopening or go forward as planned? Some said it would be too painful, too soon. Others believed it was what Sabrina would have wanted. After hours of tears and reflection, her daughters made the call: the doors would open. Not as a business event, but as a tribute. "We'll do it for her," Anesha said softly. She worked too hard for this day to die with her. The next morning, the barbershop came alive again, not with the buzz of clippers, but with the sound of quiet mourning and love. Candles lined the counters, and photos of Sabrina filled the mirrors where she used to stand and laugh with her clients. People from all over Atlanta came, customers, friends, even strangers who had heard her story. They shared memories, prayed together, and told stories of how she had changed their lives. Her laughter, her kindness, her fierce determination, it all echoed through the shop like she had never left. By midday, the symbolic reopening had become something far deeper, part funeral, part celebration. Outside, a banner read, "Let her light keep shining." Inside, her daughters stood together, hands clasped, as they cut the ribbon their mother never got to cut. The crowd erupted in quiet applause, and for a moment, it felt like Sabrina was still there, the woman behind the chair, the heart behind the name. In the place she built with her hands, her spirit still lingered, not as a victim, but as a legacy. Through grief, through tears, and through the sound of scissors once again humming in her honor, Sabrina Walker lived on. Within days, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation confirmed what many already feared. Ballistic testing proved without question, the 9mm handgun found beside Valanta Walker had fired the bullet that killed Sabrina. It was the final piece of evidence, the cold, scientific truth behind the emotional storm. Detectives pieced together a timeline that left no doubt: the shouting, the chase, the shots, all of it came from inside their home, from a man she once trusted to protect her. Investigators went door to door, interviewing neighbors, co-workers, and family. The stories began to align, forming a haunting pattern. Several neighbors admitted they had heard arguments before, muffled shouting, slammed doors, the sound of a woman crying late into the night. Friends told Detective Sabrina had once confided that Valanta's temper frightened her, but she stayed because she wanted to believe things could change. She kept saying, "He's just stressed," one friend recalled, but we could see the fear in her eyes. Forensic analysts combed through Valanta's phone, recovering deleted text messages that painted a darker picture. One message, sent just hours before the murder, read, "You won't embarrass me again." Another showed months of escalating tension, jealousy, control, and isolation disguised as love. To experts, it was the classic pattern of intimate partner abuse, one that often ends in silence until it's too late. Domestic violence specialists called the case tragically familiar. In the United States, 1 in 3 women experiences abuse at the hands of someone they love, and nearly half of all female homicide victims are killed by current or former partners. Every number in the statistics is a person like Sabrina, someone who believed love could change what anger refused to fix. But this case wasn't just about what happened that night. It was about everything that led up to it. In the weeks that followed, Douglasville began to heal the only way it knew how, together. Outside Groomsman, Atlanta, the barbershop Sabrina built from nothing, hundreds gathered for a candlelight vigil. The air smelled faintly of burning wax and rain-soaked pavement. Her daughters stood side by side beneath the shop's blue neon sign, surrounded by friends, clients, and strangers who had come to honor a woman they might never have met, but somehow felt they knew. Each person held a candle, each flame a silent promise, that her story would not fade into another forgotten headline. The community moved from grief to purpose. Within days, a fundraiser was launched in Sabrina's name to support domestic violence awareness programs across Georgia. The goal wasn't just money, it was education, safety, and prevention. Her family spoke publicly for the first time, urging others not to ignore the warning signs they once brushed aside. If she could help one person leave before it's too late, her daughter Michaela said tearfully, then her death won't be in vain. At her church memorial, the pews were filled to capacity. Police officers who responded that night sat beside her longtime clients, barbers, and business owners. The choir sang her favorite hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," as photos of Sabrina filled the screen, laughing, cutting hair, holding her grandchildren. The crowd wept openly, mourning not just a woman, but the life and light she brought into every room she entered. Meanwhile, investigators confirmed Valanta Walker had survived surgery. He was recovering under police custody, awaiting the GBI's final report. No official murder charges had been filed, not yet. Even in death, Sabrina inspired unity. Strangers joined hands under flickering candles, promising her story wouldn't fade. But the question still lingers: what does justice look like when the damage is already done? Sabrina Walker's story isn't just about loss. It's about the lives she touched, the dreams she dared, and the love her children refused to let die. Cut to reenacted interview. 2 young women sit inside the same barbershop, now called Groomsman Atlanta by the Walkers. The walls are freshly painted, but Sabrina's framed photo still hangs by the mirror. One of the daughters speaks softly, holding clippers in her hand. Some days, it's hard to even unlock the door. But this was Mom's dream. And we made a promise, that her shop would never die. Her daughters turned pain into purpose, keeping her spirit alive through every haircut, every lesson, every shared memory. The same hands that once braided hair for school pictures now guide young stylists through their first fades, their first business plans, their first lessons in courage. Cut to a small gathering, young barbers and stylists seated in folding chairs as one of Sabrina's daughters speaks. Don't ignore the red flags. Chase your dream, but protect your peace. You can rebuild a business, not a broken life. Through them, Sabrina's voice still echoes, a warning, a guide, a reminder that ambition must never silence self-worth. Her death became a wake-up call for many women balancing love, fear, and survival. Churches, salons, and community centers across Atlanta now host monthly sessions on domestic safety, a movement sparked by one woman's tragedy and one family's strength. Montage continues, news clips showing candlelight vigils, barbers cutting hair for charity, a mural painted of Sabrina on a city wall, scissors in one hand, a halo of curls around her face. She was more than a victim. She was a builder, of people, of beauty, of hope. The lessons she leaves behind speak louder than her final moments ever could. Sometimes the scariest crimes don't happen in the shadows. They happen right beside us, behind doors we never thought we'd have to fear. In 2024, Groomsmen Atlanta remained open under Sabrina's daughters. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation continues to oversee the case against Valanta Walker. Her story asks one question we can't ignore: how do we stop love from turning lethal?
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.